The wind rolled across the empty plains, carrying the soft hum of a harmonica from a distance. Dust spun up from the dry earth as a horse trotted slowly toward the fading light. On its back rode a man with eyes heavy as dusk, a cowboy named Elijah Kane. Folks in the nearby town of Dustwell called him Silent Eli, not because he couldn't talk, but because he rarely did. Words seemed to weigh too much for him. He had once been full of laughter, long ago, before war and heartbreak carved the smile off his face. Years back, he'd lost the woman he was supposed to marry. A fever had taken her, one of those cruel prairie fevers that come fast and leave nothing behind but silence. Since then, Elijah roamed from ranch to ranch, working long hours and moving on before roots could form again. Maybe he thought if he kept riding, the memories couldn't catch him. One dusty afternoon, he stopped by the Willow Creek Ranch, a quiet place tucked between hills and wind-twisted trees. He was looking for work, just enough to get by a few weeks before the next trail. The owner, Mr. Harlan, was an old rancher with tired eyes and a limp. Harlan's daughter, Clara, helped run the place. Clara wasn't the fragile kind of girl most cowboys tried to charm. She was strong, sun-browned, with strands of hair always falling loose from her braid. She spoke plain and worked hard, fixing fences, breaking horses, hauling hay alongside the men. Yet, there was something soft about her eyes, like the calm after a storm. When Elijah first met her, he simply tipped his hat and muttered, "Ma'am." She nodded, half curious, half cautious. Most cowboys who came through Willow Creek never stayed long, and she figured he'd be the same. But there was something different about this one, a quiet sadness she couldn't name. Days passed. Elijah worked from dawn to dark, hardly speaking unless needed. But Clara noticed small things about him, how he treated the horses like old friends, how he stood by the fence at sunset just watching the sky burn gold, how he fixed things without being asked. One evening, while the sky turned orange and the crickets began their song, Clara brought him a plate of supper out by the barn. "You've been working hard," she said, handing him the plate. "Figured you'd be hungry." He nodded, mumbling a quiet thanks. She leaned on the fence next to him, watching him eat. For a while, neither spoke. Then she said softly, "You don't talk much, do you?" Elijah chewed slowly, then said, "Ain't much worth sayin', most days." Clara smiled a little. "Maybe not, but sometimes talkin' helps, especially if you've been carryin' something too heavy alone." He looked at her, his eyes tired but kind. "And what makes you think I'm carryin' something?" She gave a small shrug. "Just a guess. Folks who stare at sunsets usually are." That made him smile. Barely, but enough to change the air around them. It was the first time she'd seen warmth in him. Over the next weeks, they started sharing small talks during breaks, stories about the horses, the land, the weather. Little by little, Elijah opened up. He told her about the woman he'd lost, about the life he thought he'd have but didn't. His voice broke once, quiet and rough. Clara didn't say anything. She just sat beside him, close enough for silence to feel like comfort instead of emptiness. As time passed, something gentle began to grow between them. It wasn't loud or fast like the kind of love in stories. It was slow, the kind that sneaks in like dawn light through a window. Clara's laughter started to fill the ranch again. Elijah began to hum sometimes while he worked, almost forgetting the weight on his heart. But life in the West had a cruel way of testing happiness. One afternoon, a group of men rode into town, outlaws led by a man named Jed Mercer. They'd been rustling cattle across the county, and rumor was they were heading toward Willow Creek. Elijah had faced men like them before, men who carried guns and hearts made of dust. When the outlaws arrived, they demanded horses and supplies. Mr. Harlan stood his ground, refusing to give them anything. Jed sneered and aimed his revolver at the old man. Before he could pull the trigger, Elijah stepped forward, calm as stone. "You can take what's left in the barn," he said. "But you leave the old man and his daughter out of this." Jed looked him over, grinning. "You got some nerve, cowboy. Think you can order me around?" Elijah didn't flinch. "Ain't orderin', just sayin' how it's gonna be." The standoff felt like forever, wind whispering, horses shifting, everyone waiting for the sound of a gun. Then, it came, a single shot. When the smoke cleared, Jed's hat lay in the dirt, a bullet hole right through it. Elijah's aim had been perfect, warning him without killing. Jed cursed, but something in Elijah's steady gaze made him back down. The outlaws turned and rode off, leaving nothing but dust and echo. Clara ran to Elijah, eyes wide with relief and fear. "You could have been killed," she cried, clutching his arm. He looked at her softly. "Ain't the first time I stood between trouble and something worth protectin'." Her eyes welled up. "And what am I, Elijah? Something worth protectin'?" He swallowed, his voice low. "You're the only thing that makes me feel like I still belong in this world." For a long moment, they just looked at each other, no sound but the wind. Then she leaned forward and kissed him, gentle and trembling. It felt like all the pain, all the years of loneliness, melted away right there under that endless western sky. From that day, Elijah stayed. He fixed up the ranch, helped Harlan with the herd, and began to build something like a life. He and Clara worked side by side, laughing more, talking more, dreaming quietly of a future. But life on the plains never stayed calm for long. One evening, a storm rolled in, black clouds and roaring thunder. Lightning struck near the corral, spooking the horses. Elijah ran out to calm them while Clara grabbed a lantern. In the chaos, a frightened stallion broke loose, knocking the lantern from her hand. Flames spread fast through the dry hay. Elijah shouted for her to get back, but she refused to leave him. They fought the fire together, smoke choking the air. When it was over, the barn was gone, but they were alive. Elijah had burns on his arms. Clara's face was streaked with soot and tears. She looked at him through the flickering light and said, "You stayed for us, Elijah. You could have left long ago." He reached out, touching her cheek gently. "Didn't stay for the ranch, Clara. Stayed for you." That night, the storm outside faded, and the world seemed softer. Elijah lay awake beside her, listening to her breathing. For the first time in years, he felt peace. Real peace, the kind that doesn't come from running but from finally stopping long enough to love again. Months later, as spring turned the plains green again, Elijah and Clara married under the old willow tree near the creek. The ceremony was small, just a handful of neighbors, the preacher, and the wide open sky. When the vows were said, Elijah kissed her hand and whispered, "Guess even a lost soul can find home again." Years passed, and their ranch grew strong. Folks around Dustwell often talked about Silent Eli and his wife, the woman who made him smile again. Every evening, they'd sit by the fence, watching the sun melt behind the hills. One evening, Clara rested her head on his shoulder and said, "Do you ever think about leavin'?" Again, he smiled faintly. "Not anymore. The road's long, but I've already found what I was looking for." And as the last light faded, the wind carried their laughter across the land, gentle, steady, and full of life. In a world that had taken so much from them, they had built something unbreakable, a love that felt like home.